Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the White House. I'm Maya Shankar, and I serve as Senior Advisor for the Social and Behavioral Sciences at the Office of Science and Technology Policy. I also lead the efforts of the Social and Behavioral Sciences team. I want to thank all of you for traveling from across the country to join us for an exciting day in which we hear about the administration's efforts to translate behavioral science insights into improvements in the lives of Americans. Before introducing our President's Science Advisor, I'd like to recognize those who have contributed to this effort and made today's event possible. I'd first like to recognize my colleagues and agencies across the federal government who have collaborated with my teammates and me on the SBST. Their dedication to using behavioral insights and rigorous research methods to improve outcomes in their agencies is captured in all of the results you'll be hearing about today. Individuals such as Rosemary Williams, Steve Gailing, Bruce Keith, Jessica Simpson, and Jack Kammerer are true change makers in government, and I'm excited to see what we can all accomplish together in the coming years. Second, I would like to recognize academic researchers at institutions across the country who are engaging in applied research, as well as Ideas 42, JPAL North America, and the Behavioral Science and Policy Association for their continued efforts to help demonstrate how behavioral science can help solve some of our country's greatest challenges. Third, thank you to all of my colleagues in the White House who helped make this event possible, with particular thanks to my colleagues Kristen Lee, Faye Jenks, Eric Martin, Jennifer Merritt, Sam Hushhauer, Kumar Garg, Hannah Safford, and Amira Shweki. I'd also like to thank my incredible boss, Tom Khalil, for his enthusiasm when I first expressed interest in building a team of behavioral scientists 2 years back, and for his continued support of my efforts ever since. I'd like to extend special recognition to my teammates on the Social and Behavioral Sciences team, with a shout out to our beginning team members, David Yoakum, Kelly Bidwell, Nate Higgins, Will Tucker, and Bill Congdon. Over the past year and a half, they have built an effective team from the ground up that agencies across the government have come to see as a valuable partner in achieving their policy and program goals. Because of their work, Americans are better off, and I feel honored to work alongside each of them every day. And of course, I want to thank our president, who has made all of this work possible and continually puts science and technology at the center of his administration's efforts. Using behavioral science insights to better serve the nation has been a priority issue for my colleagues and me in the administration over the past 2 years. We are fortunate that our President's Science Advisor, Dr. John Holdren, has been a strong advocate for this work and believes in the value of translating scientific research insights into improvements in federal programs and policies. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. John Holdren.
Well, thank you, Maya, for that introduction, and thank you for all that you personally have done to lead this extraordinary initiative. I also want to thank the National Economic Council, the Domestic Policy Council, the Council of Economic Advisors, the Office of Management and Budget for co-hosting this event. And I want to thank the GSA, the General Services Administration, for their support for this effort. It really is fantastic to see so many federal agencies and senior White House officials represented here today. And it's also a pleasure for me to acknowledge the presence here of two of this country's leading scholars in the dimensions of social and behavioral sciences that are central to our focus today. Professor Daniel Kahneman, Nobel laureate in economics and author of Thinking Fast and Slow, and Professor Cass Sunstein, university professor at Harvard, former director of the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs at OMB, and the author of Nudge, among other books. Indeed, the caliber of the folks who are here today from inside as well as outside government is a testimony to the importance that we attach to the task we're here to talk about: the application of insights from the social and behavioral sciences to achieving better outcomes for government policies and programs ranging across issues from healthcare to veterans benefits to financial security to education. As President Obama has said, quote, "We should all want a government that's smarter, quicker, and more responsive to the needs of the American people," close quote. I'm sure we can all think of a government process, form, website, or communication that could benefit from a refresh that incorporates insights from the social and behavioral sciences on how we as humans access, interact with, understand, and respond to information in ways that depend on how it is presented. And indeed, a growing body of evidence demonstrates that the findings of social and behavioral science about how people get information and use it to make decisions, which they then act on, can be used to design government policies to better serve the American people. The fact is that many agencies have already used behavioral science insights to redesign their interactions with those they serve. And in many cases, those changes have substantially improved the outcomes for individuals, families, communities, and businesses. To explore the further potential of using these kinds of tools to design government processes that serve Americans more effectively, the administration recruited leading behavioral scientists and innovators from across the country to be part of the first ever White House Social and Behavioral Sciences team. It was launched in 2014, and it has been led from its inception by Dr. Shankar. The experts who serve on the team help federal agencies harness behavioral science insights to improve programs and better serve the nation while saving taxpayer dollars due to improvements in program integrity and efficiency. Since its launch, the Social and Behavioral Sciences team has engaged in more than 75 collaborations with different agencies. It has successfully completed more than a dozen projects that have now been rigorously evaluated to demonstrate impact. Later in the program, other speakers will discuss the results of these projects, as well as more than 20 new SBST projects that are planned for the next year. This afternoon, I have the pleasure of announcing two important steps that the administration is taking to build on the work of the team and other agencies, harnessing the social and behavioral sciences to create a government that is built for people and improves outcomes for Americans. First and foremost, this morning, the President signed an executive order entitled Using Behavioral Science Insights to Better Serve the American People. The President is directing agencies, one, to identify programs for which applying behavioral science insights can yield substantial improvements. Two, to develop strategies for applying these insights to programs and rigorously testing and evaluating the impact of those insights where possible. Three, to recruit more behavioral science experts to join the federal government. And four, to strengthen agency relationships with the research community. To support agencies in this effort, the executive order also establishes the Social and Behavioral Sciences team as a permanent part of the government. Congratulations on that, Maya. In addition, the administration is also releasing today the first Social and Behavioral Sciences team annual report, which documents results from the team's collaboration with federal agencies over its first year. As a result of the team's first round of projects, more service members are saving for retirement, more students are going to college and better managing their student loans, more veterans are taking advantage of education and career counseling benefits, more small farmers are gaining access to credit, and more families are securing health insurance coverage. Improvements in the integrity and efficiency of programs across the federal government as a result of these efforts are also saving taxpayer dollars. And again, you'll hear more about many of these projects later in today's program. In addition to these new federal actions, the Behavioral Science and Policy Association is launching a Behavioral Science and Policy series to identify promising avenues for applying behavioral science to public policy at the federal level. Research centers and organizations from across the country have committed to participating in and contributing to this effort. The actions that are being announced today demonstrate this administration's continuing commitment to connecting scientists and policymakers and ensuring that our government leverages the best available science to serve the American people. I would add that the success of this whole effort is yet another demonstration, as if one were needed, that the social and behavioral sciences are real science with immensely valuable practical applications the views of a few members of Congress to the contrary notwithstanding, and that these sciences abundantly warrant continued support in the federal science and technology budget. And now it is my pleasure to introduce somebody who's been a huge supporter of this work and a great colleague, Jeff Zients, Assistant to the President for Economic Policy and Director of the National Economic Council. Jeff.
So following Dr. Holdren reminds me of that sort of uneasy pit-in-the-stomach feeling I had the first day I came to OMB, which was my first job in government in this building. I'd never been in government before, never stepped foot in government. And I found out that my across-the-hall suite mate was none other than Cass Sunstein, which only increased my anxiety because I thought, oh my goodness, the caliber of play here is so high, and the caliber of play and everyone here in the audience is so high that I'm humbled to be here. Cass was immediately disarmed me by inviting me to lunch, so I picked him up around 12 outside our suite. And he said, where do you want to go? And the only thing I knew about was the mess. So I said, well, I made a reservation at the mess. And Cass seemed slightly disappointed. I didn't know what the alternatives were. But as we were walking downstairs, he said, you should really check out that vending machine. It's really good. And I sort of registered it, not really understanding that I had been nudged for the first time. And we went to the mess, which was fine, but expensive. And then I ended up having lunch out of the vending machine quite frequently with Cass. Although I will say I never did push E5, which was Cass's favorite. That was the tuna fish sandwich that came out of the vending machine. So I haven't quite been nudged all the way. Speaking of efficiency and effectiveness, the private sector has had year-over-year productivity gains, 1.5%, 2% a year across the last several decades on average, and that's compounded to be pretty significant, and these are improvements in efficiency, cost effectiveness, and service quality all at the same time. The federal government stopped measuring productivity in a budget cut maybe 2 decades ago, but the best estimates are that the productivity gains in the federal sector are about 1/3 of that level. And when that, 2/3 versus, or 100% versus only 30% productivity gains index to the private sector, that compounds to be a pretty big productivity gap across time. And that's something that we've been focused on, President Obama's been focused on from day one, is how do you close that gap? Technology is at the center of many of those productivity gains in the private sector, and we all know that it's always wrong to lead with technology as the answer, but technology has enabled a lot of those productivity gains. And the federal government, for the most part, has not been very good at technology, and it's not lack of spending. The annual budget's about $80 billion on technology, but too often projects are behind schedule or never live up to their promised results. And so one of the places where the president's really focused is on improving technology, and with the first chief technology officer, the first chief information officer in the federal government, I think the team's made real progress and has expanded to create the U.S. Digital Service, which is bringing in the best of the private sector to work on technology projects, and it's starting to chip away at that productivity gap. I think that what's happening here today and what's been happening since Cass introduced behavioral sciences in a big way into the mix is that you're doing just the same. You're providing innovation to complement the technology and are achieving real breakthroughs that enable us to do more with less, which is what we need to do as a federal government. If you take, there are many examples I'm sure are going to be talked about. The one that really resonates with me is the service members in retirement. I mean, what an intersection. Our veterans, our service members, and making sure that people are saving for retirement, which is a country we're not doing enough of. And to come up with, what in retrospect seems pretty obvious, but it's like any classic insight. It's only obvious once you have the insight. A new way of getting members to sign up and having more members sign up, and at the same time have it cost less. That's exactly what we need more of. And when I think about my day-to-day with working on economic policy, this getting government to be more efficient, for people to believe that government can operate in a productive way, in an innovative way, is so important to restoring trust in government. And restoring trust in government is so important for our economic agenda, so we make sure that we have the ability to invest in education and R&D, in job training. Without that trust, we can't make those investments. So all of you as pioneers are really helping to close that productivity gap, to introduce leading edge innovations into government, to help restore trust in government. And on that platform, we can compete in the global economy. So I want to thank all of you for being here. It's a big deal all around, and we wouldn't be here without all of you. So thank you. And with that, I'll hand it off to James Quall, the Deputy at the Domestic Policy Council. James.
Thanks, everybody, for the opportunity to speak. As Jeff said, I'm the Deputy Director of the Domestic Policy Council. I will try and go quickly so that we can get to the big brains that are coming. But I wanted to give a couple of examples of how the work of behavioral science under the leadership of Maya and Cass and others have kind of wormed its way into how we approach some of the most important policy questions that we're working on. And I have two examples. The first is the student aid application, or the FAFSA. I don't know if you saw, there was a web video yesterday where the president successfully said FAFSA 5 times fast. Started a viral trend. I cannot do it, obviously. But you know, one challenge that we have in financial aid, and we've made huge investments in financial aid, the president has essentially doubled spending on federal scholarships, including Pell and the American Opportunity Tax Credit. But to get Pell Grants, you have to go through this complicated form called the FAFSA, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And we know that some 2 million students who are actually enrolled in college and probably Pell eligible do not make it through this gauntlet to get their, the aid that they're eligible for. Students who are considering whether to go to college or not often overestimate the cost of college by 2 to 3 times. So you wonder about whether the complexity of the eligibility formula and the application process are hindering the stated purpose of the Pell Grant program of making it possible for more students to go to college. And there was this extremely interesting study that Eric Bettinger and others did with H&R Block, where they had low-income families coming in and filling out their taxes, and they said, why don't you stay for an extra 10 minutes and we'll fill out your financial aid form at the same time. We see you have a high school senior. And this intervention cost about $90 per participant. About half of that was a stipend to the taxpayer and to H&R Block for their time. And the impact on college enrollment was incredible, not just on FAFSA completion, but the percentage of these students who were likely to have completed 2 years of college rose from 28% to 35%. So that's a 1/4 increase, not just in FAFSA completion, but in actually going through all the other steps of identifying a college, applying, enrolling, and doing 2 years' worth of coursework. That's a cost of about $1,100 per enrollee. So that's a huge impact for a very small intervention. Now, interestingly, there was no impact on merely telling students about the FAFSA. There actually wasn't even an impact if, in some cases, they didn't have quite all the information, so they mailed the student a completed form later, and all they had to do was sign it and drop it in the mail. So there's something very precise about the intervention, and you know, I think that speaks to the difficulty of designing these. In part inspired by this work, we've worked very hard to simplify the FAFSA. We've introduced skip logic, so the form is tailored to the applicant. For example, if you're over the age of 24, we know we don't care how much your parents make, so we no longer ask you. We used to ask you anyway. We also let you get the data electronically from the IRS, so you don't have to scrounge up your old tax reform and re-enter it. Those changes have reduced the average time it takes to fill out the FAFSA from about an hour to about 20 minutes. So you have 21 million people a year filling out this form. That's a lot of Advil that we have saved, I hope. But I think, again, there's a little bit of uncertainty about what it is that sort of like captures the magic or the spark that had such a big impact in the intervention that was tested by H&R Block. And so, we're also working hard at trying to capture the personal element of that. The First Lady has a campaign called Reach Higher that works with college counselors and others to guide students through this process. We're working with states and high schools to give them lists of who filled out the form and who isn't, so that they can follow up and set their own goals for FAFSA completion. The behavioral science team has done some experimentation with text messaging to try and guide students through the process of the FAFSA and college enrollment. So there's a lot more to do. And I think this example speaks to the great potential of carefully designed behavioral schemes to have a disproportionate impact, sort of punching way above its weight class. But I think it also speaks to the difficulty in trying to figure out exactly what it is that is having this spark or is having this magic and these effects that are far larger than at least my intuition would have led us to believe. You sort of have to think carefully about what it is and study the different elements there and try and also replicate them very, very carefully. A second example where we've been using some behavioral insights is in student loan repayment. And you have about 1 in 8 students leaving school today default on their student loans within 3 years. Default means you make no payment over the course of a year. So that means you have a fair number of people who basically never make a payment at all on their student loan. The thing that's like a bit puzzling from the policy perspective is, even if the loan is large, even if you don't have a job, there are lots of tools that are available to you through the Department of Education. So the president is very proud of his pay-as-you-earn plan that caps payments at 10% of income. But even if you don't want to do that, if you're unemployed, you can get a loan deferment, you can get a loan forbearance. So there's essentially no reason that a student would need to go into default and suffer all the consequences of the credit rating. You're ineligible for future financial aid, your wages get offset, your federal benefits get offset, ultimately your Social Security. So we've been working very hard to try and get in touch with those students and figure out why they aren't taking advantage of the tools that are available to them. We've had good effects with reminder emails that were designed by the behavioral science team, and that increased payments by 30% among those who had missed a payment. We're also working very hard to get more students into our income-based repayment plans, where your monthly payments are on a sliding scale based on how much you make. And we've seen some of those emails increase enrollment by 4 times. So, and that's an area, too, where we're continuing to work very hard at figuring out what the right information is and how do you deliver it in a time and a manner that it actually impacts people's decision-making. So from my perspective, this is a very important tool for us, particularly at this term in the administration. Many of the goals that we're trying to achieve rely on impacting individual choice or encouraging individuals to take an action. We have millions of interactions with members of the public every day. There are about 15 million visits to U.S. government websites every day. We can improve those interactions without legislation, often with very modest cost. And this is also an area where there's high potential for partnerships, where we can work with others in nonprofits and other layers of government and businesses who share our goals and are eager to help us accomplish them. So for all those reasons, I think this is a place where we could make quite a bit of progress in the 500 days that we have left. And I think, that what we really need help on from the community is thinking about, what exactly is the intervention. Oftentimes people have the intuitive sense that information is what students need, and they'll make the rational choice. That may sound naive in this room, but it is often uphill, talking about how you need to go a step further and structure the information very carefully and deliver it in the right time and manner. I think we need to be very careful about consulting with the groups we're trying to affect and maintain high fidelity and replication, something I mentioned. So with all of that, really look forward to the conversation today, and I'm going to turn it over to someone who I know is a big supporter of evidence-based policymaking and behavioral science, and that's Sean Donovan, the director of OMB. Thank you.
James, thank you so much for your insights, your thoughts. I also want to say thank you to a huge range of folks across the administration that have made this work possible and for co-hosting this event today. It really is the best of the White House and the best of government that we're bringing together between the National Economic Council, the Domestic Policy Council, the Council of Economic Advisors, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and of course, my terrific team at OMB. And I was really excited to be able to be here today to be part of telling the SBST story. And if you think about it, it really is remarkable what's been achieved in just a year. I think you all know better than anyone that building evidence and acting on it, if you do it right, can often be a slow and painstaking process. And that makes it only the more impressive when you look at what SBST has done in little more than a year. Completed more than a dozen randomized control trials, RCTs, testing a variety of program improvements across many, many different agencies. And I would add, as the budget director, they've done all this on a shoestring budget. And so really impressive. What I wanted to try to do is to tie this work to the broader evidence agenda that we have across the government, because I really do think that this work exemplifies the best of what we're trying to do in building an evidence agenda across the government. Fundamentally, the work of this team and their partners is fundamentally about both learning what works and acting on that knowledge to implement more effective strategies. And of course, for OMB, that is really the sweet spot, if you will, of what we do. We try to figure out best practices, what works best, and then work directly with agencies to implement that and ensure that those best practices are spreading across the government. And you know, everybody in this room, me included, we can appreciate knowledge and learning for its own sake. But what SBST is doing is really moving beyond just testing different practices and risking putting the evaluation results on a shelf somewhere. We're actually taking this, as James started to talk about, to do everything from working with the Department of Defense to help service members save more, to getting our Department of Agriculture employees to use less paper. Time and time again, in all of its different explorations, SBST has been successful in working with government programs to take action based on what they've learned. I think something else that really relates to the evidence agenda and is important in the way that we're building friends and building support across government is kind of an underappreciated aspect of evaluation. That it can be used not just to ask the basic question of, is a program succeeding or not, but to really adjust and help programs evolve over time to become more effective. And I've seen this now, having worked in administrations here in Washington at the local level. I worked in the Bloomberg administration, that when you bring a rigorous evaluation sort of framework to government, what you can often run into is the fear of the kind of all or nothing aspect of evaluation. That some people can see, whether that's folks who are advocates of a program or elected officials who don't want to risk failure, what you can often find is a resistance to evaluation because it might actually surface a failure that folks wouldn't want to own or own up to. And one of the things that I think has been so important about the work that this team has been doing is to get inside programs, to make advocates of those who run the programs and say, hey, we can help you do this better. I saw this very directly when we set very ambitious goals around ending veterans' homelessness and worked very closely with the VA to be as rigorous as possible about what we were finding, not only nationally, but community by community. And in fact, we've cut veterans' street homelessness by almost 50% since the beginning of the administration. A lot of it I give credit to the evidence-based policies that we were bringing, not just in the big evaluation of this working or not, but how do we continue tweaking the program, making adjustments in real time so that we can make progress. And that really relates to another part of what we're trying to do in the evidence agenda. And that is to really build evaluations into the normal operations of programs. Because it's critically important that on key policy or implementation questions that we can answer them not just reliably, but also quickly, to have as close to real-time feedback as possible. And that's why we've promoted through the administration the use of iterative rapid cycle RCTs. We recognize that this is not a sort of magic bullet, that we're not going to be able to implement that everywhere, that this approach is not applicable everywhere. But the SBST's success in using this kind of approach, I think, can really serve as a model and meet the need that many policymakers have of, look, get me something quickly so I can act on it. And that's a very important part of what we're doing. A good example of that is the rapid and iterative tests of several aspects of reminder emails our General Services Administration is using for its tenant satisfaction survey that has allowed GSA to rapidly improve response rates in those surveys and to get to better outcomes in their efforts. Now, I would also say that if you're going to continue to make progress in using evaluations to improve all our programs, we have to make it cheaper and easier to have these high-quality evaluations. And making better use of administrative data that the government currently collects is, I believe, one of the most important and promising strategies that we have. In fact, it's so promising that not only is it a key part of the administration's evidence agenda, we actually devoted an entire chapter in the President's FY16 budget to this specific topic. And now, with most audiences, I can joke with them that I'm sure nobody in the room has actually read all of the President's budget. With this audience, I'm suspicious that there may be one or two of you that have actually read the chapter on using administrative data in the budget. But I really do believe that this is enormously important. And I do think the SBST's work is a shining example of the power of using administrative data. Administrative data is critical to practically every one of the SBST projects. Using administrative data has made these projects affordable and achievable. Many of them couldn't have been completed if they had to go out and survey all of the people that their tests touched. And the process would have been incredibly burdensome, but also extremely expensive to do that. These administrative data sets also allowed SBST to look at much larger groups of people than they could through other methods. And you all know this is huge because it allows us to detect important and cost beneficial but modest effects which we couldn't even see if we'd used smaller samples. Now, we all hold out hope of finding that sort of magic bullet, of getting something that is going to move the needle dramatically. But the truth is, most of the time, what the evidence shows us is making changes is actually going to move the dial slightly. That may reach millions of people, but if only when we have the power of large data sets are we actually going to be able to detect reliably those kind of effects. And so the scale that we can get with administrative data at a reasonable cost is incredibly important. With these smaller without these larger samples, we easily could have concluded that payment reminder emails to student borrowers that James talked about don't matter, or that personalizing letters to farmers and including action steps don't affect their loan application rates. And in fact, what we found is that they do, and those steps are now making a real difference in people's lives. The last thing that I really wanted to touch on is the connection between this work that we're doing and a very timely conversation about our budget. You may have noticed that we're a few weeks away from the end of the fiscal year, and that we don't yet have a clear plan from the Republican Congress of how they're even going to get a short-term CR passed, much less the kind of budget deal that we need to move the country forward. And as I said earlier, it isn't just enough to learn what works. We have to take action and do what works. And that includes funding the programs and strategies that have shown to be effective and the infrastructure that allows us to learn which strategies are more effective over time. The President's 2016 budget includes a wide variety of investments in these activities. Unfortunately, the Republican budgets that we saw over the summer underfund both programs that have proved their value through rigorous evaluations and new investments in learning what works. The House and Senate appropriations bills don't come close to matching the President's budget in investments in evidence-based programs. Not only do they not approach our levels of investment, in some cases, they don't provide funding to maintain the existing level of services for programs that have been shown to be effective. One that's near and dear to me, and I see some of my former HUD colleagues in the audience here, is the Housing Choice Voucher Program. We had really remarkable research recently that we saw from Raj Chetty and others that showed an average annual increase of 15% in adult earnings among young children of families who use the program. Think about that. Enormous administrative data set on taxes that was used in really innovative ways by these researchers to show over decades that young children who got these vouchers, their earnings increased by 15%. I mean, the scale of that impact is really astonishing. You all know better than anyone that to see that kind of movement is really unusual from any program. And so here's a program that should be a shining example of what works. And yet we see proposed cuts, not even maintaining the number of families that are served, but significant cuts to the number of families that can be served from the current program. But there are other examples as well. The Republican bills would eliminate preschool development grants, which are part of the administration's early education initiative, which is also motivated by strong evidence that high-quality early education improves children's long-term outcomes. Meanwhile, the House and the Senate proposed to underfund investment in evidence building by cutting the Teen Pregnancy Prevention Program and eliminating First in the World, the Social Innovation Fund, and investing in innovation at the Department of Education. These programs enjoy strong support from outside organizations and experts, and they're designed to identify strategies that work and provide those strategies more funding. The House and Senate bills also include deep cuts or eliminations for many of the programs and offices that are the backbone of our evidence-building efforts, including innovation centers, the census, and federal evaluation offices themselves. Now, I will say that this is a fight that I believe that we can win. If you all help in lifting up your voices about the importance of these programs, I believe that we can not only end sequestration this year, get investments in a broad set of priorities that were part of the President's budget, but also make progress on this evidence agenda as well. And specifically, progress on the SBST agenda. Whatever the outcome of that fight, though, I have enormous confidence that the remarkable team that we've put together with all of your help will continue to do great work within whatever resources we can provide. And I look forward to a long and effective future for the team. So thank you all for your support of the work that we're doing. Thank you for your engagement with us. And I now want to turn it to my colleague and friend Jason Furman, who is the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, who's going to tell you a little bit about using scientific research to better inform policymaking. Jason?
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Maya, for your leadership consistently on this issue and putting together today. And thanks to all of you for coming. I'll be relatively brief because the next act is Cass Sunstein, who will be juggling 5 balls on a unicycle. Don't want anyone to miss that. One of the useful things I learned in graduate school was you don't want to take one quirky random paper and rush out and make public policy based on it. One of my professors said the optimal lag between something appearing in the American Economic Review and it being ready for deployment here in Washington was 10 years. That professor didn't teach me it would then take Washington another like 15 years to actually pass the thing once you knew for sure you needed to do it, so it would be 25. In the case of behavioral economics, depend on when you date it, it coming into full force and maturity in this administration around the year 2009 is almost about right in terms of where we were academically. There was an awful lot of research, an awful lot of it raised really important questions, highlighted a number of important policies, but I remember when I started graduate school, there was a new assistant professor, David Laibson, and everyone thought he was really smart and really nice and felt slightly sorry for him that he was going to gamble his entire career on the success of behavioral economics. Turned out well for David, and it turned out well for the world that he took that gamble following on the pioneering work by Danny and many others here and much of the work since then. We've been putting this into practice in a number of different places in this administration. It's something we were doing before we had an executive order. It's something that we'll be able to do even better with this stamp on it and this process around it. Some of the successes we have are small, inexpensive interventions, like sending 8 text messages reminders led to a nearly 9% increase in college enrollment among low-income students. Delivering personalized messages to farmers that included a tailored set of actions to apply for a loan increased the number of farmers obtaining a loan by 27%. And highlighting to veterans that they've earned an education and career counseling benefit led to nearly 9% more veterans' access to the application for that benefit. So when you simplify, communicate clearly, set better defaults, all of this can lead to better results. The ways in which to do this aren't always obvious in advance, but when you combine it with the administration's commitment to evidence, you can figure out what they are.